Welcome, everyone. The topic of our talk today, been 1 hour, is finding Geulah in times of darkness. And I've certainly witnessed times of darkness. I think all of the Jewish people have witnessed times of darkness recently. First of all, please feel free to ask questions in the chat, by the way, and I will interrupt. Please interrupt me at any point, and I will answer you if it's relevant, or at least at the end, hopefully. And it will make it more interesting for everybody if you ask me questions as we go along, and I'll try and address them. I guess I feel, and my family feel, that what we went through on April the 7th, for those of you who don't know, my wife Lucy and my two daughters Maya and Rena were massacred in a Hamas attack on the way up to our Pesach holiday on April the 7th, exactly 6 months before this current war broke out on October the 7th. And I think that what we went through for the 6 months is similar to the process that the whole Jewish people are going through now. And therefore, I think there's some lessons that could be learned and some things which I can say, which other people may not get away with. And nothing that's dynamite, but perhaps I have the license to say, and other people maybe don't feel comfortable to say. So how do you get through tough times? And I think there are two major ways in the Jewish tradition to confront this. One is the natural way, and the natural way is the way we all felt on October the 7th, when we saw what had happened and we sort of clicked how severe it was. We felt shock, we felt sad, we felt bored, we felt disgusted, we felt frightened, and I think many other words which I don't have in my vocabulary, and we still feel them today when we think about the hugeness of what happened and the pain of the hostages and the families of the hostages and those who lost loved ones who are still, in bereavement over them. Those who don't know what's happened, just the scale is unbelievable. I mean, just to put that in perspective, I don't know how people are dealing with this. I've met some amazing people over the last few weeks. I went down to the Dead Sea with my daughter Karen, and we went to visit some families from Be'eri. And generally, we found them tremendously strong. That was a kibbutz with 1,200 members, 110 who were massacred on the day of October the 7th, and 70 who were taken captive. And we met the families who were all together. This was only 2 or 3 weeks afterwards. And helping each other. I mean, it was like a big family. Like the only way I can explain their level of coping was that a family of 6 might have lost 1 or 2 members, but actually they were still part of a family of 1,000. And I mean, and that's in a sense what I and my family felt, that we lost 3 members of our family, but we're still part of the family of 15 million. 14 million Jews around the world, and so in a sense that's some sort of comfort when you're embraced en masse by the whole Jewish people, and in that case by their close friends and family around from the kibbutz. But just to give you an example of, I mean, not that anyone needs an example of the tragic circumstances. When we turned up, there was a father and his daughter sitting shiva. This was already about 2 or 3 weeks after the tragedy, so you can see how long it took for them to bury their loved ones. And their story was they were in their safe room in the morning. They heard the banging, the shooting. They locked themselves in. They were lucky, I guess, that they had an internal lock in their safe room, which is not always the case. They were under attack for 12 or 13 hours from Hamas terrorists, knowing that they were unarmed. Knowing that they were helpless. They were constantly shooting at the door. They didn't get through. Then they smashed a hole. They managed to shoot a hole through the window. The windows were laminated, so it took them quite an effort. They threw in 3 hand grenades, killing his wife, who died in his arms, and his 14-year-old son, who died of bleeding, but not before he'd said he wanted to be buried with his surfboard. And Avida, who was the father, was sitting in a wheelchair when I met him with one leg, and his 6-year-old daughter with her arm in a sling. and they obviously had a lot of shrapnel in their skin, which is not removed apparently because it's the best thing is to leave it in there. Tremendously strong, and but just to describe indescribable horror and evil that they faced. And of course, I had the opportunity to meet some of the hostage families who are sitting in a tent city, effectively outside of Tel Aviv Art Museum, sort of shiva type of arrangement where all of the Jewish people are able to come and visit them, bring them food, give them a hug, and it's just sort of suspended reality. But we'll talk about that hopefully in a second. Any case, there are two responses, I said. The one response is the natural response, and I think that that's in our sources because the book of Job is a story about Job, who is punished by God for no apparent reason. He has every possible tragedy under the sun. He goes and sits at home with all his friends visiting him, discussing why it happened, philosophizing. Was he bad? Was he not bad? Does God care? Does God not care? And every possible permutation of the above. After 42 chapters, getting to absolutely no conclusion whatsoever, but just being frustrated as a reader of this book, thank God, God gives him some reason to celebrate a new wife and children, and the book can come to an end. Otherwise, we'd still be reading it and still sitting there in his lounge, wondering why it happened. And the rabbis interestingly say, this book probably never happened. And if it did happen, Job was probably not Jewish. And they say this for a reason, because this is not a Jewish response to tragedy. It's a natural response to tragedy, but it's not a Jewish response to tragedy. And whilst it is totally understandable that we en masse sit at home on our Telegram, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, newspapers, television, speaking to friends, why did it happen? Who's guilty, and what will come of it, and so forth. That is all a Jobian response, which is not a Jewish response. So, what is the Jewish response? And I think that we have a character in our tradition who gives us that response very beautifully, and that character is actually Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, who lost 24,000 students within a period of 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot, probably during the Bar Kokhba rebellion, where he and his students were fighting for Bar Kokhba. They falsely believed that he was the Messiah. He turned out not to be. But in any case, they got slaughtered by the Romans, who were effectively the Hamas terrorists of their day. And in a very cruel way, he lost 24 years of teaching of these students. He lost probably most of his best friends and probably most of his family. He lost everything, and he could have had a Jobian response, which would have meant that he would have retired to his living room, been surrounded by people asking what happened, gone into depression, gone into oblivion, and gone into pension, and disappeared from the face of reality. But he didn't, and in fact, he selected 5 students, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He taught them, I think, from scratch, and brought them up to a level where they became the rabbis of the Mishnah, which we study till today. And because of them, we have the Talmud, and because of them, we have pretty much all of Jewish learning. And because of Rabbi Akiva's stubbornness and his determination, we are here today living a Jewish life. And there's another story of Rabbi Akiva, which everyone knows perhaps, that he goes up to the Temple Mount, sees destroyed Second Temple, and he laughs. And his friend said to him, well, how can you laugh when you see the destruction of the Jewish dream for the past 500 years? And he says, well, there were 2 prophecies, one of Micha and one of Zechariah and Zechariah. And Micah prophesied that the Second Temple would be destroyed, and Zechariah prophesied that the Third Temple would be rebuilt. And having seen the fulfillment of the first prophecy, I now believe the fulfillment of the second. So why wouldn't I laugh? So we see tremendous optimism, although it's not optimism. I actually heard the Geulah Sachs, Rabbi Sachs's daughter, saying in his name just recently something which I'd heard him say himself a few years before, that there's a difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is believing things will get better. Hope is doing things to make the situation better. Rabbi Akiva was not an optimist. He was somebody who was full of hope, and he made things better, as we saw with his 5 students. Another story about Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is dying. In fact, he's being murdered by the Hamas terrorists of his time, the Roman soldier, executioner, who is filleting him alive, basically pulling his skin off his bones, his flesh off his bones, in the most cruel way possible. And before he dies, he shouts out, his students apparently are surrounded watching this. He shouts out, which is interesting because clearly the GoPro cameras of the Hamas terrorists have a precedent in Roman soldiers who gathered together the Jewish students to watch the vile atrocities as a form of terror, to warn people about what they could do and what they were capable of. But in any case, he shouts out, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, which one would normally suggest might mean, I believe in God, or God is one, or, a sign of faith in God. But then his students shout something very odd. They shout Ad Kan, meaning to this extent, meaning even now, which is very odd because we know that there's no atheist in a foxhole. And here we have Rabbi Akiva, who's proven himself to be probably the greatest rabbi of all time, maybe bar Moshe Rabbeinu. And they're saying, at this point of death, you still believe in God? That would be the sort of simple understanding, which would be crazy, because if he believed in God all his life, then even more so the moment before he died would he shout out Shema Yisrael, as we know. So what is going on? And in order to understand this, I think one has to understand the most important Rashi in the Torah, and in fact, the Rashi that's probably the least studied or least known in the Torah, and that's the Rashi on the Pasuk Shema Yisrael, because Rashi says this is not first and foremost a verse that describes faith in God, but actually it means as follows: Shema Yisrael, hear O Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, the God who is our God today, Hashem Echad, will be the one God in the future. In other words, of all the nations, meaning that it's not so much a statement of faith, it's actually a statement of purpose. And that, of course, explains why it would be the first thing we teach our kids, because actually, clearly, the first thing we want to teach our kids is why be Jewish? And the answer is Shema Yisrael Eloheinu Echad. Actually, our job is to spread the knowledge of God, meaning Western civilization, Judeo-Christian values, whatever you want to call them, to the world, which we've done pretty well, with some exceptions, unfortunately, but maybe that's being done at the moment. That is what he apparently was shouting. Now we can understand the response of his students, because Rabbi Akiva is saying to the executioner, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, our God will be the God of your people, of the Romans in the future, Roman Catholics, arguably. And his students say, Ad Kan, you really care? Let this guy go to hell. Let all his people go to hell. They can all disappear in a puff of smoke. We don't care. And Rabbi Akiva is saying no, because it says in the Shema, B'kol nafshecha, with all your soul, even when Hashem takes your soul, even when they're killing you, you still have to believe this. So what an amazing statement of faith, really, ultimately, in Hashem and his purpose from Rabbi Akiva. So we see the hope of Rabbi Akiva when he is being murdered. We see the hope of Rabbi Akiva when 24,000 students of his are murdered. We see the hope of Rabbi Akiva when the dream of the Jewish people for 500 years, the Second Temple, is destroyed, and that is destroyed. So we say to ourselves, how could Rabbi Akiva responded in this way? And how would he know that that is the right response of a Jew in this case? And I think the answer is that he looked into the Torah straightforwardly, and he saw that the story of the Exodus, the history of the Jewish people, resulted in us being slaves in Egypt for 80 years. We were there for 210 years, but we were slaves for about 80 years. And we got down to the 49th level of degradation. And then Hashem took us out, and within 7 weeks, we were collecting the Torah on Har Sinai, on Mount Sinai. This is the Torah, which is the greatest gift ever given to mankind by God, the book of ultimate morality, which we have shared with the rest of humanity, obviously not so successfully to some groups, but again, that is underway. But this book is still a best-selling book in the history of mankind, and even today, was given to us 7 weeks after reaching the lowest possible point of destruction, effectively. And so Rabbi Akiva sees that somehow pain and suffering and tragedy leads to Geulah, to redemption. And if he had Ruach HaKodesh, which we know that he did, maybe he also saw that Jews would be prisoners in death camps in Germany and Poland for 6 years, and would come out, and within 3 years would be establishing the state of Israel. And maybe he saw further that for 6 days, Israelis would be digging graves in their thousands all over the land of Israel, thinking there'd be a second Holocaust, God forbid. And then after 6 days, the Jewish people had another redemption where we recapture the Kotel, and Jerusalem and Judah and Samaria. So Rabbi Akiva would have had a lot of work, a lot of evidence that this was the case from Jewish experience, and even from nature, as the Netivat Shalom, I think in the Kuzari says, that if you plant a seed, then if you had a camera to basically watch it over time underground, you'd see it degrades and rots to almost nothing. And you would swear that it had died completely and gone from this world. And then just at the point at which it starts going green, you'd swear that it was disappeared forever. A tiny little bit of green would appear from the kernel and would start shooting up and could create a tree that could last really forever. And if we talk about trees lasting forever, I had a beautiful idea from Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson recently. He talks about redwood trees. Redwood trees are the oldest living, I think, tree, but maybe even species in the world. And some of them have been around for over 3,000 years, probably the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the time that we were leaving Egypt. And he said, scientists were interested to know how is it possible that these trees could live so long? And clearly the issue is how they can maintain water supply and nutrient supply even during the dry years and times. So they assumed that perhaps the roots went down very, very far. But when they dug down to check, they found they went down only about a meter or two, which is not very far at all for trees which are hundreds of meters high. And then they discovered something very odd, that the root system actually went horizontally and they connected one with the other. So what we see as a forest of redwood trees actually is one organism, effectively. They feed off each other, so that if there's a dry patch in one part of the forest, but there's access to water in another part, then actually the water can be transferred from tree to tree until it gets to the tree that needs it. And that's what maintains the life of this forest, which effectively is one organism. And I think as a mashal, as a parable for the Jewish people, I think this is what he was inferring, the unity of the Jewish people, when we are together and we're helping each other, as we see in this current conflict, we are invincible. And we help each other even across the world. Jews across the world help us in Israel and vice versa. And together in the Netzeach, we will win. And we sustain each other, and we will be invincible and last forever. And God forbid, if we are separated, as we saw before this conflict, then that might not appear to be the case. Any case, so we see that tragedy in Jewish tradition is followed by redemption, and the big tragedies are followed by the big redemptions. And if we look at this tragedy is on a par, probably greater, with the 6-Day War, with the Yom Kippur War, with the 48 War. And the response clearly is greater than any previous war that we've had in Israel's history. And the risk and that we're putting our soldiers to, and the tragedy of the hostages, please God, which will be resolved speedily, to the benefit of to bring them home safely. These things are greater than anything we've seen before, probably that mankind, civilized mankind, has ever seen before. Maybe bar the Holocaust, although there are elements of this attack which I think clearly are even worse in terms of quality to the Holocaust, particularly the level of barbarity and the level of filming it live, which even the Germans and Nazis were embarrassed by some of the acts they did and had to drink themselves to stupor in order to achieve it. But these people apparently calling home to their parents, who presumably weren't on tablets of drunkenness, and boasting about how many Jews they'd killed in cruel ways, apparently did not require the same level of anesthetizing as the Nazis. In any case, if that's the case, we are, according to Jewish history, in for a greater step of redemption now than we have in history. And if you look at the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah that we say 3 times a day, the next thing in our wish list is actually building of the third temple. So I think that is probably, possibly what is in store for us, please God, speedily in our time. But in any case, if we wanted to see where this might be leading, I think we could look at when it happened. It happened on Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah is the time we opened the Sefer Torah at the story of Bereshit, of creation, and we read that there was Tohu Bohu, there was chaos, which there clearly was, and it was followed by Vehi Or. And the rabbis say that the light that was created on the first day of creation was not the light of the sun, because clearly the sun was created 3 days later. So it was the light of truth. And I think the light of truth has been shining since October the 7th, because immediately after October the 7th, evil people started marching down the streets of London, New York, and Paris, and other places, screaming with joy at what had happened. And that was shining light on evil. And the Israeli response was the light of good. And these people continue marching under the pretense that they care about Palestinians, but in fact they don't. They actually care about killing Jews and Jew hatred. So the light of evil is continually focused on these people, and the numbers are increasing, and people are more and more aware of what evil actually is, what it looks like, and what it says. And I think that is very important. I actually interviewed this morning with the New York Times. They came to Jerusalem, and I met them in a cafe, a couple of gentlemen, and I'm not sure how much I will be quoted, because I didn't say what they wanted me to say. And strangely enough, they asked me, what did I think of Rabin's assassination? Because obviously, as a West Bank settler, I must be a right-wing extremist, and I must be supporting terror and Jewish terror, which frankly, I think there's probably about 3 culprits in the history of mankind, most of whom went to prison or were killed. But in the eyes of certain of our non-friends, Israel is evil and the terrorists are good. And I said to him, if you pursue this particular track, when jihadism attacks America, they will not be thanking you for your approach, because then you'll have to retract everything and try and work out how to sort of deal with the challenges that presents. But I don't think that I will, as I say, will be quoted very much in the article, because I didn't say what he had in mind, even though I said to him, I know that this is not what you want, and I'm sorry I didn't say to you what you wanted to hear. And he said, no, we like to hear exactly what you want to say. But I noticed he wasn't writing for most of the interview, because he wasn't getting what he wanted. So, any case, anyway, so if we wanted to see that things had, are for a purpose, leading to something incredible, I think. I mean, it's the tragedy, the tremendous tragedy, is leading to something in terms of growth and redemption of the Jewish people. I say Simchat Torah is a sign. We open the book at Genesis. We talk about a new world, and I think that everybody in Israel, and perhaps people in the diaspora, feel that we are now in a new world. In fact, when the tragedy hit my family in April, after the Shloshim, the 30 days of mourning, I turned to my kids and I said, we're in a new world. We lived in world number 1 up until the 7th of April. It was 2 parents and 5 kids. We've had 30 days of pain and suffering and misery. And we're now entering a new world where there is 1 parent and 3 kids who will be equally happy. We'll have memories of the past and of Lucy and Maya and Rena. But we have to live, and we have to be happy, and we have to move forwards, because we have no other choice. And we were blessed by the fact that all of us started new careers or schools or activities which helped this concept that we were in a new world. And people ask me, well, how has this war on that 7th of October affected us? Actually, because I feel like the whole of Jewish people is now in a new world, and we as well, we're now in a second new world. So we're now 2 worlds away from where we were. And actually, in a sense, that makes it a little bit less fresh. Our particular personal tragedy, obviously the tragedy that happened on October the 7th is very real. But in terms of our personal tragedy, it's another world away. So God's given us a gift of putting us in a new world. It might not seem like a gift because if you're living in the diaspora and you are subject to the anti-Semites on campus, marching down the streets, in the newspapers, that doesn't necessarily seem like a gift. It is a gift because all that evil and anti-Semitism existed before. Now it's a bit more public. And actually, I think that there's evidence to suggest that a number of people are understanding this more than they did before. In other words, it was our secret up until the 7th of October, and it became a little bit more public. So I was in England last week and speaking to students, and they were saying, well, how do we deal with these people who, are free Palestine and so forth? I said to them, look, there were 300,000 people marching in London last week for pre-Palestine. I said, that means there's 60 million who didn't march. And, you should focus on the 60 million because, frankly, many of them are very sympathetic to the Jews and what happened to us. They're not speaking about it and they're a little bit undecided. But frankly, don't waste your time with the 300,000. Focus on the 60 million. And I think the case is the same in America, in Europe. The majority, I would say, I hope, of decent Western people, Christians, even Muslims, support Israel attacking Hamas. They understand that actually the best thing for the Palestinian people and for the Jewish people is to eliminate jihadi terror wherever it is. And then actually it's coming to a screen near you. That if we're just the front screen, we're the front line of battle here. First of all in the West Bank, second of all in Israel general, and thirdly, in the Middle East, and then then it will move to other places. Timing, don't quote me, I don't know. But if we get support to do the correct job here to eliminate jihadi terror, then that will bode well for the West. And if we don't get the support, we'll do it anyway, but it won't bode very well for the West. And I don't, see a future for Jews or non-Jews actually in the West. But I do see a great future for jihadi Muslims if there's no support coming from the West in this current conflict. So this is what we saw. We're in a new world. The evidence we're in a new world is multifaceted. As I say, we've seen the rise of anti-Semitism. It's not the rise of anti-Semitism; it's the exposure of anti-Semitism. We also saw Biden stand up and make a speech that was the most regal speech that I've ever seen in my life. It was the power of a monarch that I don't think any of us have ever experienced. And this coming from a man who, in speeches that I've seen before, could not necessarily make it up into the platform without tripping over or make it through any speech without forgetting his lines halfway through. But it was absolutely fluent and absolutely beautiful and absolutely flowing and passionate and emotional and, as I say, only regal. And can only be explained by the verse in Kohelet, in Ecclesiastes, where King Solomon says that Lev ha-melech b'yad Hashem, that the heart of a king is in the hands of God. And the Rambam explains to us that actually everybody has free choice, but it has to exclude kings, because a king can make a decision that could instantly affect millions of people and therefore affect their freedom of choice. So it would not be fair if kings had complete freedom of choice, because it would basically obfuscate other people's freedom of choice. And therefore, it must be that God controls kings occasionally in order to make sure that everybody else has freedom of choice. And it was clear to me that God was controlling President Biden at that point, and perhaps subsequently, hopefully, ongoing, because what he said was completely inconsistent with his policies up until that point. And it was beautiful to hear. And I think it was really the words of Hashem emanating from his mouth. So, this is how the world is changing in real time. But the other, another example of how the world is changing, not unique examples, is how the call up for the Air Force on the day after the tragedy The Air Force expected only 6% of reservists to turn up based on the 40% that were refusing up until that point. And 120% turned up because 20% said, we're coming too, even though you haven't asked us. And we see that there was an apparent 60% unity, achdut, and suddenly it was 120%. And it doubled really overnight. It was not even 24 hours. It was instantaneously, because every individual who saw, once they saw a video and clicked what was going on, it was an instantaneous response. I'm going to be there. I'm going to fight. People are fighting. I mean, I went a couple of weeks ago down to the front to help with a barbecue, 2-hour drive down to the front of Gaza, and met 50 reservists aged 21 to 42 who were just there training and were waiting to have the go-ahead to go in. And one of whom was my bank teller from my local bank. One was a startup entrepreneur from Tel Aviv. Another one was a plumber. Someone else was a math teacher. That was the sort of mixture. We turned up at 7 o'clock. They were on WhatsApp to their kids, generally bedtime to their young kids. They were a hodgepodge of Israeli society, left, right, religious, not religious. And I said to them, I said, how do you feel about going in? And they were amazing. To a man, we're ready. We are ready to go in. We want to go in now. I said to them, how do you feel about the enemy? And they said, look, we don't hate them. This is not about revenge. This is about making sure that October the 7th does not happen again. As we know, the enemy has been saying that, given the chance, they will be perpetrating more October the 7th. So we have no choice. And I think that the humanity of the Israeli army is absolutely incredible. The incredible generosity of the Jewish people, both in Israel and abroad, to help the soldiers on the front. As people have said, a number of government agencies have failed, but the Jewish people has not failed. And generally speaking, pretty much everything that they need has been provided, plus. That is something to be tremendously proud of and needs to continue, because there's tremendous amount of resources required to keep 300,000-400,000 volunteers, reservists, effectively on the front lines. Tremendously brave men and women. Any case, the world has changed, and we ask ourselves a question, not why, but for what? As I said at the funeral of my daughters, in the name of Rabbi Soloveitchik, it's not lama, but lama. Not why, but for what? Having said that, there is a little bit of a why question that I could address, which I didn't know the answer to at the time of my daughter's funeral, but subsequently discovered when somebody dropped me off a couple of books of Siftei Chaim by Rav Chaim Friedlander, who was the Mashgiach of Ponevezh, and he talks about why do these things happen, and I hadn't read it at the time, and I have read it now, so I'll share with you a little idea of his and maybe of mine. He talks about God working in two different mechanisms. He said God works in schar va'onesh and in mazal. In other words, that God works with reward and punishment, and God also works with mazal. Now, mazal is not luck. He says it's from the language of nazilut, of flowing, of dripping, of flow, and that's how God works in the universe. So how does that work? So I picture it as a kosher airline meal, and we're all sort of bits of food inside, and it's triple wrapped in plastic, which you have to open with your teeth because they never give you any scissors or any other way of opening it. And basically, our lives are generally within that plastic container, and we have the rules of schar va'onesh, of reward and punishment. We know that if we study Torah like we are doing today, we will hopefully have the right sort of information to live our lives in a decent way. If we live in a Jewish community, we will have close friends and supportive friends. If we bring up our kids not, to support them, to respect their parents, we should have a good family life, and we should respect our parents and have good relationship with our parents. And generally speaking, if we're good people, we will have a good life. And if we don't follow these type of rules, and we just are wild and break every rule. God forbid we could end up dying at the side of a street at the age of 23 of a drug overdose alone, with no one to bury us. And that's the reality that most of us perceive, and Baruch Hashem in our lifetimes have experienced. But then you have something else, which is mazal. So says Rav Chaim, what is mazal? So I put it in this way. This wasn't his parable, but you take a pin, God takes a pin, he pokes into the kosher meal, and he starts prodding bits of the food with this needle. And that's the mazal, God fiddling with the rules of schar v'onesh, in order to bring, what does he do it? He does it in order to bring Geulah in its time, redemption in its time, because sometimes we all have free will, and it means that sometimes God's plan may not happen exactly how he wants it, if one could say that. And therefore, in order to speed it up when it's necessary, he has to poke his pin in and cause a little bit of pain. And who does he poke the pin at? Says Rav Chaim, to Jews. Why Jews? Because we're the chosen people. We're the chosen people chosen to bring Geulah, redemption, in its time. It's not always a good thing to be chosen. We perceive that this is like a great benefit always, and we should keep it quiet because people be jealous if they think we're the chosen people. I think if they knew what it was to be the chosen people, they'd say, "Fine, you be chosen," and we wouldn't have anything to do with it. But says Rav Chaim, God pokes his pin at Jews, and he brings redemption. It doesn't answer the question why, says Rav Chaim, completely, because we don't know why he chooses particular people, and we don't understand why he does a particular time, and we don't usually know what it's leading to, but that is what he does. And we know that the people he chooses are very holy souls. They die by Kiddush Hashem, like my wife and my daughters, like the 1,200 who were murdered on the 7th of October. And it's difficult for some religious people, I have to be honest, to understand this, because when we look at the characters who were murdered on the 7th of October, if you are traditional and you keep Shabbat and you keep kosher and you dress a certain way and you live your life a certain way, it's hard for some people to understand how God chose those people who perhaps have a different lifestyle to be those holy souls, to die b'Kiddush Hashem. And the rabbis tell us that once somebody dies b'Kiddush Hashem, ends up in a layer of heaven next to the Kisei HaKavod, to God's throne, above the greatest Talmidei Chachamim, above the greatest rabbis and Rebbetzins and holy people that we generally perceive. So it's not easy for some religious people to understand this. I think that it's an important wake-up call for all of us, because if we look at the soldiers who are risking their lives now and who are dying for Kiddush Hashem on the fronts, many of whom are not traditionally religious by definitions of our very narrow-minded approach to this, these soldiers are, again, amongst the holiest people in the world. And if they don't keep Shabbat and they didn't keep kosher, but they die in Kiddush Hashem, they end up in a level of heaven above the greatest poskim and rabbis in the world. In fact, the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, said on his deathbed that his one regret was that he didn't get to die by Kiddush Hashem. So we see that the top rabbis in the world can accept the fact that those who do die by Kiddush Hashem are on a higher madrega, higher level than them. And for some people, it's difficult to understand. I mean, I think that fighting and risking your life for the Jewish people on the front line in Gaza or in the north of Israel, anywhere, or dying, in a terror attack because you're Jewish. Actually, you've been selected. Someone's been selected for this role by God. We don't always understand why those souls were selected, but they were selected. And maybe we should have a broader idea of what holiness looks like and what religiosity looks like. And that's a lesson to all of us. And just a side story, I was asked on last couple of weeks ago to go to Beersheba by a couple. The husband asked me to come speak to his wife because they'd lost their 23-year-old daughter, Rahman al-Atzlan, in Kfar Aza. And I turned up, and I thought maybe they wanted me to talk about bereavement, although I'm not sure I'm very good and comforting in bereavement. But she said to me, the first thing she said to me was, um, I don't light a fire on Shabbat. So I said, so you keep Shabbat? She said, no, you don't understand. She said, the only thing that I do Jewishly in my life is I don't light a fire on Shabbat. That means I don't make a barbecue on Shabbat. I don't do anything else. And I don't know anything else. She said, I don't want to be a Balat Tshuva, but my daughter died for one reason and one reason only, because she was Jewish. I don't know what it means to be Jewish. I'd like you to help me to understand and point me in the right direction to find out what it means. So that's the world we're in. The world has changed. A lot of the soldiers on the front line are, as you're aware, wearing tzitzit and asking for tzitzit, asking for tefillin, wearing tefillin. And there's just amazing stories of what's happening. Please God, may they be true. Please God, may they continue well after this episode is over. Any case, the question is, I think, not so much, as I said, why, because we haven't really answered that question. We can get a little bit closer to it. But the question really is, what for? And I think we can look at the question, what for, in three ways. According to Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, there are three things that Judaism stands on: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. That's Torah study, prayer, and action. So if we take them one by one, I think we can sort of look at how they interact with tragedy and with crisis and with darkness. First of all, Torah. Rabbi Sachs, Zatzal Moriva Rabbi, said on his Yahrzeit Shabbat, actually, Chai Sarah, which we just read the Parsha a couple of weeks ago. He talks about Abraham, who enters the Parsha, the last Parsha of his life, at the age of 137, and God's made him three promises. Number one, he'll be the father of many nations. Number two, that his offspring will be like the stars in the sky in number. And number three, that he'll inherit the whole land of Israel. Says Rabbi Sachs, he's in a crisis. He doesn't have any grandchildren. Isaac's not married. He has no relationship whatsoever with other religions in the world. And he has not inherited 1 square millimeter of the land of Israel. So in fact, the three promises God's made him have not come true, and he's 137 years old. Says Rabbi Sachs, what does he do? He starts off in the Parsha by buying the Marat Machpelah, the Cave of the Patriarchs, which he buries Sarah in. It's the first piece of land ever bought by a Jew in the land of Israel. Then he goes on and sends Eliezer, his servant, to find a wife for Isaac. He finds Rebecca. They get married, have kids. Baruch Hashem, he's ensuring the future of the Jewish people. And number three, he himself, Abraham, gets married to Keturah at the end of the Parsha. They have 6 sons, name them Indian names, and the grandchildren Indian names, send them off to the east, which Rashi says is India, with matanot, gifts, which the Rashi says is basically Kabbalah. And they seed the Eastern religions. And by the way, the main god of Hinduism to today is Brahman. So basically Abraham. And that is interesting. But in any case, he solves these three problems. He listens to what God told him, and he acts on them in the last moments of his life. And I think from this, we can see a Jewish approach to crisis. In other words, when we are in crisis, we should think about what God has told us and act on it too. We have a disadvantage on Abraham that God probably hasn't spoken to us directly, but we have an advantage on Abraham because God has spoken to us through his book, which is the Torah, which Abraham didn't have access to, according to, I think, rational commentators. Although the Midrash does say that he did, but we can dismiss that in the way that Rambam quite happily dismissed it. So Abraham didn't have access to the Torah. We do, and therefore the Torah that we have at a time of a crisis is what will help us through that crisis. And when I and my kids faced our crisis, we basically thought we were in a dark room, latching onto whatever was closest to us. Thank God we had some emunah, we had some Torah, we had some mitzvot, and those are the things that helped us through. If we hadn't had those, God forbid, we might have ended up on drugs and depression. But we had it. In fact, I will tell you, my friend Avida, who was this so-called non-religious Jew, he would probably call himself non-religious, from Be'eri, told me a beautiful idea, which I think was Torah min Hashemayim. So, the Torah doesn't necessarily have to come from the regular places. Perhaps he heard this somewhere. Maybe he just intuited it. But when I told him, when I met him, that when one way that helped get through our tragedy was to think we're in a new world. And I told the kids that we're in a new world. And I said to him, now you're entering a new world. He said, I look at it differently. I said, how do you look at it? He said, I look at my life like a train journey. And he says, some people get on and off at different stops. And I looked at him, I said, Avida, I said, your parable is better than mine. So that was Torah min Hashemayim. Avida, who claimed that he was not religious, although, by the way, he told me his father came to the kibbutz at the age of 7 from a Haredi family. So, I think that most people who consider themselves not religious in Israel are probably more religious than many people who consider themselves to be religious all over the world. Any case, Torah helps you in a crisis. His Torah helped him. My Torah helped me. And your Torah will help you through this crisis. And any Torah you learn will be something which will help you understand the meaning of life, the purpose of life, the way to live life, will help you to get through the crisis. Tefillah, prayer. How does prayer help us? Well, prayer is odd because I want the soldiers to come back safe, well and alive, with a great success behind them. And I'd like all the hostages to come back alive and healthy, without any trauma ongoing. And I pray for this 3 times a day. But if God has decided otherwise, what difference does it make what I think? And to this, Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg helped me. About 3 years ago in his Emunah Shirim, he talked about the fact that somebody had won the lottery in Florida, and in the newspapers on the front page, they'd advertised the number, the time and the date, and the place, which was near the shul in Boca, where the person had bought the ticket. And everyone was waiting to see, who would turn up. After 6 weeks, nobody turned up. The money went back into the pot, and this person obviously missed out on a pot prize of $150 million. At which point, Rabbi Ephraim said, this is a tremendous mashal, parable, for tefillah, for prayer. He said, because God has got $150 million waiting for each and every one of us. And all he wants us to do is to bring the ticket. So all we have to do is bring the ticket. Basically, Hashem wants all of us to come en masse as Jews with complete unity and achdut, and pray for the return of the hostages and for the safe return of our soldiers, for success in this war. And if we all were to come, we would get that. But it is dependent on us bringing the ticket, on us coming. So that's a couple of hours a day. Each of us can pray and can think and can focus on this particular task, maybe combine it with messages to the hostages' families, to the family of the deceased. By the way, something which people did for me, which was way beyond the realm of duty. And at the time, I felt like, why are they doing it? And surely somebody else would benefit more from this. And, I don't need this. But something which I can suggest to you for those families who have been bereaved. There's a kibbutz, I think, or a settlement in the north, Binyamina. I don't even know who. Send my family a bouquet of flowers every Friday afternoon. They must have paid the local florist. And at the beginning, I thought, why? And, what do I need this for? And surely it could go somewhere else. I can't stop it because I've got no idea who did it. It's actually beautiful and really comforting and just amazing. And, I don't know how much it cost them, probably quite a lot of money. But if communities in America wanted to arrange that for each of the families who were bereaved for the next year, to send them flowers every Friday, I don't even know where you can find them because they're not at home. It is a tremendous nechama, it's just a tremendous feeling of love and support. And if you want to do other things, local communities, when we had our tragedy, baked cakes and brought them to our shul, to my shul. And there were like 150 cakes outside shul on Friday afternoon, Friday evening, and everyone was asked to take one home and have it for Shabbat from Alan Shavut or from Elazar, from other local communities. So the many things which you can do, which you wouldn't even think are that powerful and meaningful, but actually that they are actually. I mean, even though the person at the time probably doesn't appreciate it, they can look back like we do and really feel appreciative that these things were done in the memory of our loved ones. But the main thing I want to leave with you is really action. And action is the third sort of thing that we do as Jews, and action is the thing that I think that probably Rabbi Kiva did mostly when he had massive tragedy. And if you're in a war, action is what needed. And we talked about action, we talked about flowers, we talked about cakes, we talked about all the support that you've been giving and that Israelis have been giving to the soldiers on the front line. And all these things are tremendously important, tremendously valuable. If you happen to be English speaking, which I guess you are, I think there are a couple of other things which could be tremendously valuable to do. And those are, number one, create social media messaging. Why is this important? Okay, because if we are consuming too much social media, as I said, we're all Jobian and we're all sitting on our couch watching too much social media. We probably know a little bit more than average of what is being said, and we probably disagree with a lot of it. So rather than responding to people who are anti-Semitic, which is a waste of time, create new messages, because at the end of the day, this is a war of good against evil. And in order to maintain this, we need to continually educate the world what is good and what is evil. And even though to us, because we are Jewish and we've studied Torah for many years, we have a reasonably refined idea of good and evil. We have to understand that the majority of the world has not studied Torah and does not have such a refined view of good and evil. And to them, us killing kids, the Israeli army killing kids in Gaza is the same as terrorists coming and beheading kids in Be'eri. And there's moral equivalence between the two, and therefore, it's just a numbers game. And since their numbers of casualties are higher than ours, then we should stop. We understand that things are a bit more complicated. There's murder, there's killing, there's self-defense, there's rodef, there's all different types of sort of rules which come into play. And as the war goes on, there'll be more and more challenges to explain the morality. We are in the right, which helps, and they're in the wrong, which also helps us. But it doesn't help if people can't explain it. And no individual actually can explain this very well all the time. But all of us together are like a massive brainstorming session. So the more you're sending out of your views and the more people are seeing it, the more the brainstorming session continues. And even if you get 10 views, but one of them sort of takes that idea and moves it further in one of their posts, and somebody else, eventually Bibi will be saying it, like you said, Hamas is ISIS, and Shalom al Yisrael, that you've really achieved something major. So please post ideas, because if you have an idea, it's no good if it's in your head. It's got to be out there. And if you don't know how to post it, then your kids will know how to do it, or your grandchildren will know how to do it. And if you don't think of any new ideas, or you don't think you have any new ideas, meet with friends, discuss what ideas you could post, and have little groups of 2, 3, 4, whatever, and put it together an hour a day to do this, in conference, to think about it, to post, to publish. That's on the social media side. That's one big thing that English speakers can do. Second thing that English speakers can do is raise money. Giving money is important, but raising money is even more important. Ma'aseh gadol meha oseh. The person who gets other people to give is greater than the person who gives themselves. And the charities out there need your help. Not just your money, they need your help. There are charities of all types that are suffering at the moment. The obvious ones would be the charities that help my kids for the last 6 months by sending them on trips with other kids from bereaved families, where they've really made amazing connections and had a lot of comfort from speaking to people who've been in a similar situation. The number of orphaned kids from terror in this country has doubled on October the 7th, and these charities cannot cope. If you contact them and you ask them, how to set up a JGIF page, whatever, to do a campaign, you have friends and family and Christian churches near you who want to give money, people who want to give money, businesses want to give money, people who will want to give money. They need you to contact these people, speak to them directly, cold call, shake hands, meet these people, ask them to make donations, and big donations, please. And that's something which you can do, which Israelis can't do. So please think about that. Other charities, obviously, Leket and agricultural charities. There's a tremendous crisis in agriculture because most of the farmers are on the front line, and no Palestinian workers are allowed into the country, and Thai workers have all been withdrawn because of the tragedy that happened to their friends. So we are workerless. School kids, my 14-year-old son included, are going out there. My 18-year-old daughter, who's now at Midrash Alod and Linnebaum, is going out for 3 weeks to do agriculture now with her SEM. And I hope that more and more people will be doing that, but we need your help. Last thing, a mission. I think that, don't believe the Yetzer Hara that says they don't need me, I'll only be a burden, what do I need it? That's all Yetzer Hara. The truth is, if you book a flight tomorrow, you come out for a week, for 2 weeks, for a month, you quit whatever you're doing, you take a break from your job, from being a student at university, from school, and you take your kids, it will be the greatest thing you ever do in your life, and much more valuable, I guarantee, than pretty much everything that you're doing in America or Britain or wherever you are at the moment. I'm sorry to say that, but during the Six-Day War, many Jews came from England, America, and Europe, and all over the world to help. We need it more than ever. And, you will not be a burden if you come and you help in agriculture, or you help in some way or other. There are many organizations that will help put you in touch. I think Mizrahi and other organizations can organize these things. And you can do tremendous value just bringing some money into the economy. I was in England last week on working for the Foreign Office. The flight was empty on the way there. It was busy on the way back, but the flight's not full. And the hotel's probably not so full, and they need you to come now. And don't say they don't need me, because that, as I say, is Yetzer Hara. Yetzer Tov would say, I will drop everything and come. So I'm sorry to be demanding. Action is the greatest thing you can do. Last thought. Nobody's asked the question, so I'm just rambling. When our tragedy happened, I went to a psychologist a number of times, and Benny Limon from Jerusalem, amazing guy who's also a rabbi in Al Shavut. He said to me a beautiful idea. He said, "You're suffering two separate pains, difficulties, and tragedies in your life." So, number one, he said, the time that you would have spent with your wife, and when you come home at night, or your kids on the weekends, or pick up the telephone, said all that empty time is a constant reminder of the pain. That's one issue. So number two is when you just think about them, you cry because you think about what you've lost. And I said to him, you know what, this was a few weeks after it all happened, and I was very busy. Baruch Hashem, people asked me to do tremendous things and projects and so forth. And I said, Benny, that two things. It helped me in two ways to be busy with these projects, which I do in memory of Lucy Meyer, really each one dedicated to one of them. I said, number one, I'm so busy that I don't have any time where I think, what would I've been doing? And number two, when I think of Lucy Meyer and Rena, I think about the amazing things I'm doing now in their memory. And that fills me with some joy, even though there's still a lot of pain. So my message to you is, if you get busy and you take on projects, come on a mission, you raise money, you send out regular posts on social media, I said you'll solve two problems. Number one, you have less time to sit there thinking how tragic and how dark things are, because actually things will be, you'll be too busy to worry about it. And number two, when you think about what happened in the darkness of what happened on 7th of October, the light that you're bringing into the world through what you're doing will be a positive aspect of this, and you'll look at them and think positively with some joy of the good which they inspired you to do in your life because of their tragedy. So I think that is the solution. Action, be busy, take on projects. There's so much need to be done. Jewish people are small people, but we're very smart people, and we need every single one to be involved all over the world now. Thank you very much.